Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. All right. Let me get this set up. What's up, everybody? Supreme Decisions, and today I'm going to go into the Alchemy of Law, transforming conflict into justice. Now, one of the things that we do, as you can see a lot of times, I tell you guys, I don't just do law. I don't just get on here and just say stuff. This is actually my life. This is my lifestyle. This is what I do every day. I don't play law. So basically, what I'm going to do is kind of explain Alchemy of Law. Now, many of us read this in high school or some in college and things of that nature. And maybe you got it back then. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you have no idea what alchemy is in itself. Now, alchemy is often thought of as turning lead into gold. But what if I told you that every time a courtroom door opens, a similar transformation happens, where human conflict is placed in the crucible of law, and through heat, pressure, and refinement, what comes out is a form of justice, or at least society's closest attempt at it. Now, what I always talk about is what separates me from everybody else is understanding the process. And law as a process is transformation. And even in the context of doing this, everything that you do has a process to it, step by step, line by line, precept upon precept. These things that were preached to me constantly during my RICO trial, these things that are taught to me constantly whenever you're doing anything. Because even if you're working in a restaurant, yeah, I use that example more often than I should. But it's easy because it's the idea of creating the same result over and over and over and over again. And the whole thing is working the exact same process. Even if there's a different meal, the preparation is still the same. You just add different ingredients at different times. And these are the same things that you're doing in a courtroom. You file different motions at different times, even though you're starting with the same base every time. Lawyers and judges are modern day alchemists. Now I'm going to get into that and how that works. And how ancient principles of alchemy, transformation, purification, balance, and the quest for perfection mirror the workings of our justice system. Now, if you actually follow me on Instagram or Facebook or hell, even X, which is formerly Twitter, you would see I posted something last night, literally in the middle of the night, because I was watching an interview with Kevin Gates that was done by Paul Pierce, and I think is After Dark or something like that. The Truth After Dark. Great podcast. Go watch it. But what he spoke about was making sure everything that you're doing is in balance. So a lot of times what happens is because you have someone on the outside, and even when I spoke about energy cannot be changed unless it's from an outside source. So when you have someone that's technically on the outside that's telling you different things and getting you off your balance, it now creates imbalance throughout everything in your life. It creates a different mood change. It creates a different way you approach even how you're going to make them, or if you're even going to make them, or in some cases, even if you're going to eat them. Because of one of your ideals are misaligned and out of balance, it throws off all of your ideals and makes all of them misaligned and then out of balance. And these are the things that are done through the alchemist principles. Now, I'm going to go into transformation, how disputes become judgments, and correspondence, as above, so below, and how that correlates in law. Purification. Now, it's filtering out corruption and illegality. I butchered that. But balance is your adversaries, your rights, and order. Philosopher's Stone is the pursuit of perfect justice. Now, I still got a couple more, but I want you to catch that. The pursuit of perfect justice. I always tell people whenever I'm helping them or assisting them or guiding them, however you want to do that, is I always speak to the fact of what is it that you're looking for as your level of justice? What is it that your outcome that you're looking for? Because that's your justice. And oftentimes people say, oh, well, I want some money. Well, what happens until you get to that money? Because whenever I'm asking the question, I'm asking your perfect justice because that's the point in which you cannot be swayed from. No matter how much the pushback that you're receiving, no matter what threats you're receiving, no matter how strongly they're talking to you, you are not going to be deterred from your goal. And that is your perfect justice or your philosopher's stone. These things are asked because the stone itself is a metaphorically immovable, or how do you put that? It's something that you're not going to sacrifice to not get. So understanding that, that's what's being asked, and those are the things that we're talking about when I'm talking about perfect justice. Hermetic seal, the courtroom as the crucible. Now, before we get into this, we're going to go into what does alchemy teaches us about justice and ourselves, because as a father on good days, because I'll never proclaim to be a great father or anything like that. However, I always taught my kids, know thyself. And in the context of one where if you are pushed to a point, you understand what you can be pushed to and what you're able to accept and why you're able to accept it. And in the context of life, you're going to be pushed into points in which you must know how much you can actually tolerate, and you are willing to not only go to, but to go through. And these are the things that all of these go into the ideas of why you're doing something. Because even if you're filing a lawsuit, even if you're defending yourself in a criminal case, even if you're the plaintiff in a civil lawsuit, you must have an end game. There must be something that you're working towards. There must be something that you're willing to tolerate. And I do mean willing to tolerate, because to give you an example, most people don't know the amount of times I've sued police officers. I've sued federal court judges. I've sued district attorneys. I literally multitudes of them. And as you begin to win, the threats become different. And it's generally coming from people that you don't think should be threatening you. And that's the funny part about it. But the threats were taken serious to a point, because I understood something and then it became an acceptance. Now, the acceptance was, okay, if this happens, there's going to be a fall off from it. And I'm good with the fall off. Or if it's ever a instance of this, I'm willing to accept what comes behind that. And all of that is one of those where even my, you know what? Yes, even my stupid ass, whenever I was understanding the mission I was on, I actually had my brothers, and I've spoken about this before, so I can understand what I'm willing to go through and how far I can be pushed. I had literally had my brothers tie me to a chair and waterboard me. And for those that don't know what that is, you're literally tied, arms strapped to a chair. They're putting a wet rag over your face, leaning you back. And when they lean you back, they're now dumping water in your face. I did that just to see how far I could be pushed. Not that it ever happened, but I was willing to see how far I could be pushed before I broke. And in the context of that, the average person is not willing to even accept that is a possibility to be pushed there. And that's one of the things when we're speaking about it in your pursuit of perfect justice is also knowing thyself. So now, after that long ass soliloquy, we can go into transformation. And the alchemy, turning base metal into gold. Law, turning raw disputes into structured outcomes. Now, the reason why there are structured outcomes is because everything that you do in law has decisions that need to be made about it, as well as the fact that you are going to have to go and make a decision on how you're going to follow the process. Notice I said how, because, example, 3 or 4 years ago, I did a video. If you ever have a criminal case or, criminal case, do this first. And it's 3 things. Now, in those 3 things, number 3 is optional. The reason it's optional is because I actually go by the saying, if you have the law, bang the law. If you have the truth, bang the truth. If you have neither, just fight. But also, if you don't have an advantage, offer time. And the third motion is a speedy trial motion. And the reason being is if you don't have the advantage on your initial filing, don't file it, because the speedy trial motion is generally a pressure type motion. Now, when you do have the advantage, that is now an option, because you also have a time in which you can file it in certain stages of through the course of your trial or lack thereof. All right. But now I'm going to give you a couple of examples of turning raw disputes into structured outcomes. Now, let's say you have a bar fight. Charges are filed. You then have a trial, and we go into sentencing. Now, here's the context of it. Here in Texas, there is literally on the books an agreement for mutual combat. You have 2 people or 4 people or however many people, and they say, you know what, meet me outside, let's fight. If that person gets up and they go outside and they engage in combat, and they engage in physical combat, there is no crime. However, if one of those people is badly, let's just use that, badly injured, there is a instance in which there can be charges brought, because there is a physical injury to a member of the public that is detrimental to life. And that can spark a defense or spark a charge. Now, if those charges are filed, you then have the right to then fight, because that's all it is offering the opportunity for that fight. Now, going through that, you even have a sit-down trial. Now, what I've found is some people don't understand the context of law or the basis of what it should be or what it actually is. So they'll accept a sentence, whether it's, probation, whether it's a fine, whether it's versus actually taking their 76% chance of winning, and which is actually better than most prize picks and DraftKings and that nature. But they'll actually do the prize picks, but won't actually gamble that anyway. But these offer you the opportunity to make decisions that you are going to then live with. Right now, do you have a defense? Absolutely, because again, it was mutual combat. You accepted consequences. That is literally what the law is for. Now, if there are other things that happen outside of it, let's say someone introduces a gun, someone introduces a knife, those are things that are raw disputes that are next outside the scope of the mutual combat agreement, because then it becomes a contract. That contractual dispute is now spilling over into something else. And this is where the conflict itself does that. And the justice would be the actual fight and the gathering of the people for the trial. Because again, your justice may be just not going to jail. Maybe your justice is, I don't want to go to jail for 15 years. So if you go to jail for 8 years, that is your pursuit of perfect justice because you did not go the length of time that you were thinking about. And this is the alchemy of what law is. Now, what you're looking at is everything starts with the chaos, but it ends with structured justice. Because even a car accident is something that can be something as simple as I got a dent in my car versus we have negligent homicide because you were inebriated when you were operating this conveyance and you actually run into the back of somebody and they end up dying. See, those same instance, but those in two separate instances become different levels of chaos. And now, what is the level of justice? You figure out what your perfect justice is. And even when we're talking about famous cases, Gideon v. Wainwright, I've actually done a couple of videos on this, but just to give you an idea of it. Gideon was poor, uneducated, had scribbled pension. The Supreme Court decision granted right to counsel for all defendants. Understand the verbiage, because the reason why I talk about this is because I've had people say, oh, well, you can't represent anybody in court because you're not an attorney. Absolutely, I'm not an attorney. However, one of the cops' favorite thing is jailhouse lawyer. Do you know where that comes from? Because there's this thing that allows for people to represent others because it just means learned in law. That's what lawyer means. If you go back to the original definition, learned in law, if you go to our Constitution, it was written by 14 attorneys. Well, with 14 attorneys, but they did not use the word attorney. They used counsel. Abraham Lincoln was counsel. He was never an attorney. He represented a lot of people in court. In federal law, there's this thing called next friend, which again is where the term jailhouse lawyer comes, because there is a premise which allows for next friend to be representation. And these are the things that Gideon and Wainwright offer. And it's the granting the right to counsel to all defendants, not an attorney, not a lawyer, counsel. That is it. You have the right to counsel of your choice. All defendants have this right. Now, the transformation is the one man's fight into national precedence. Because the whole thing that Gideon wanted to say was, hold on, I can choose who represents my interest, whether it's myself, whether it's this guy over here, I choose that, not someone else, because I am in sound mind of determining who speaks for me. And most people think you have to get an attorney because that is the thing that is pressed upon them instead of the actual law. And again, if you don't believe me, Gideon v. Wainwright, and it's a 1963 case. Go watch the video. Go read the case law. These are the things that the Supreme Court decided on. But again, these are the impressions that most people don't want you to have when you're speaking about or even doing the things that deal in this. And this is where the conflict goes in, because the conflict is not only the issue or matter at hand, it's also dealing with those who are manipulating the law, which again, what did I say? Hold on, let me go back. I want to make sure I read it right. Lawyers and judges are modern alchemists, because the prosecutor and the judge and even your defense attorney are alchemists. They are the ones that are trying to shape and restructure how it is that you're perceiving what they're doing. And the reflection, every case, no matter how small, has the potential to become gold for society. Why? Because everything that you do can become public record. Notice I use the words can. Because even in the context of my RICO case, you still cannot find most of that case because, one, it is unheard of and unprecedented for a pro se defendant that is sitting there, that is literally first chair, to win a case with 108 counts. Because I remember it was literally 13 different crimes on 8 different pages. Like, it was the most incredibly crazy thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was dumbfounding. And to have someone that is not actually part of their team beat them, that is not something that they really want on record. And it's funny because I've had a lot of people go and say, hey, I see you in court. I know that's Courtney Johnson, and I don't see that case. And even with me, I've also given the different things that has happened over the time of what's happened to my files, what's happened to my grandmother's house, what's happened to my actual house, and what's going on with different forms of paperwork. Because again, the cover-up itself is part of the corruption that the alchemy speaks about. And now when we're talking about how the alchemy principles apply to law, the laws transforming human conflicts and even going to anger, harm, injury, and the crime, and even with the opportunities for judgments of dismissal, going to jail or getting probation, or even restitution. These are things that are applicable, that are applied and looking for in your form of justice. Now, the principles of correspondence. As above, so below. Alchemy in a microcosm reflects macrocosm. Now, inner transformation mirrors outside transformation. Because I told you, this is a psychological game. This is not about law. This is about money. But it's also about intimidation. And even when I spoke about just now, Gideon v. Wainwright, they are looking to mentally break what it is that you are attempting to do and how you are thinking. And even when we're talking about that, because the way you are thinking on the inside, it then comes out. When you're speaking, if your voice is shaky, if those things are, all of those are tails. If your hands are crossed, if your hands are uncrossed, if your legs are shaking, the body language in which you're exuding, they're being read because, again, this is a psychological event, not an actual lawful event. Now, the integrity of the law system reflects the integrity of the individuals within it. If laws are corrupted at the top, injustice trickles down, and if individuals transform, through rehabilitation reform, society transforms. Now, I speak about 95% of all cases don't go to a jury. I also speak about 95% of people do not fight back. And I even spoke about the context of, let's say we take another 5%. Why? It seems small, right? Five more percent, where it's 1 out of 9 people, 1 out of 10 people actually say, you know what? No, let's go to trial. Not only does that force the system to change, but it will actually grind our legal system to a halt. Just 1 out of 10 changes our system. But what that has to do is go to the macrocosm, because it has to be an inner transformation before the outward transformation can happen. And again, that goes back to what I spoke about with the Kevin Gates, talking about all inner systems have to be in balance. And this is where most of the balance is then corrupted, because most people are programmed to believe the first thing they hear, see, instead of actually checking on it and researching it. Just literally 5%, 1 out of 10, instead of 1 out of 20. Because it seems like, again, seems like an insignificant number. And most people are like, well, me fighting back won't really mean that because of this. Because I live paycheck to paycheck. I can't afford to fight back. Well, then you can't afford to actually do anything other than accept whatever it is they're doing. Because even like I spoke about the City of Coffee. City of Coffee had 250 people. They had 50 police officers. 100% of the police officers in Coffee, here in Texas, were bad police officers. That 250 people town, 250 person town, generated more than $1 million in revenue. Why? From traffic stops that no one fought back on. And how did they find out everybody there was corrupt? One person. One person out of 250 decided to say, you know what? I'm not paying all this. That one person fighting back closed an entire police department. Just let that sink in. One person fighting back changed an entire police department. It closed it. A corrupt police department was closed by one person fighting back. And even I love the phrase young man spoke about, if you think you're insignificant and you're too small, he said, lock yourself in a room with 2 mosquitoes for a night and see what type of difference those 2 mosquitoes make about your comfortability to sleep. And most people don't even get that because they don't understand the context of what it is, because understanding means you have to go somewhere deeper. And the application in which we're talking about is individual rights and government mirror one another. Should. Protecting the individual from arbitrary state action strengthens the entire constitutional structure. The problem is, no one is forcing the constitutional structure. I'm going to say that one more time. No one is forcing or enforcing the constitutional structure because they're rather stay comfortable than actually protect it. And the principles of purification, the whole thing of purification is kind of fun for me because it's removing impurities from substances before transformation. Removing impurities from substances before transformation. The one person fighting back in Coffee City removed the impurities, which was the 50 police 50 police officers that were corrupting a city. One person. They removed an impurity to create balance. And that is, again, one thing that needs to be done. All of us need to challenge everything that's done to us. We need to make sure it is done on a constitutional and lawful level. Filtering unreliable evidence, bias, or misconduct to purify the process of justice. That is the challenging of everything. Filtering unreliable evidence, bias, or misconduct to purify the process of justice. Understand that. And the application is the exclusionary rule. It's like Map v. Ohio, suppressing illegally obtained evidence. And these are the things that are done generally when they're searching without a warrant. Because, again, was it Malloy v. Hogan? Stated a police officer does not know what probable cause is. Jordan v. City of New England. Police officers are not being hired with an IQ above 104. So it's 104 or lower. They're not the most intelligent people, which is why they don't know what probable cause is, which is why they are supposed to get a warrant before searching or your consent. You never give them consent, and you never have to speak to them. Due to the Fifth Amendment and the advice of counsel, I choose not to answer this or any further questions. I've said this literally 1,000 times. Most people have the right to remain silent. Few people have the ability to, because we've been programmed to believe that we have to give someone an explanation just because they're standing in front of you and saying things. Let them talk, because talking means nothing. And then when they do wrong, you spank that child. That's the whole thing. You discipline that child. You chastise that child. You go speak to their parents. You go straight to federal court. We don't sit here and play with people just because we think it's okay. Now, by challenging everything, this ensures the gold of justice, GOLD, is not corrupted by the dross of DROSS of unconstitutional actions. We do not allow unconstitutional actions to slide or be accepted. We only make sure they're doing their job as they accepted the job to be. The principles of balance: sulfur, mercury, and salt. Everything is comprised of trinities. Harmony requires balance. And again, this is one of the things that this is one of the things that when we're talking about the law of numbers, the law of how this country is built, and the Masonic principles in which this country was built on, the law of three: Father, Son, Holy Ghost, sulfur, mercury, salt. These are things that earth, wind, fire. These are things that are done in the ideals of completion. And I actually even broke it down even further. Cop, judge, prosecutor. Those things are your three whenever I was talking about the movie Predator. Most people miss that. But again, this is what I'm talking about, the principles of balance. And even Kevin Gates spoke about the three systems in which need to be in balance. Be balanced. Your mental, your physical, and your emotional. All of those need to be in balance for you to actually be able to function properly. And a lot of times you don't need the outside influence from others, even if you believe they care about you, to influence or disrupt that balance. And the law of balance requires competing forces: freedom versus security, rights versus responsibility, state power versus individual liberty. Now, here's the oxymoron in that one statement. The oxymoron is state power because it's given to you through your individual liberties, because most people don't understand the context of these, right? And even Benjamin Franklin spoke about a man that will give up his freedoms for security deserves neither. And that's what a lot of us have done. We've given up. Well, we don't need guns until we need a gun. I'm not at war until we're at war. And I love the fact, well, what would you do if someone breaks into your home? Now, I'm going to give you my story of coming here to Texas, which is one of the reasons why I love Texas. Because at one point, I could not legally own a gun. Because, as you know, the RICO case. And I was on the no-fly list and all that good stuff. But when I came here to Texas, time had elapsed and I'd done some other stuff and talked to some people and handed some things, but basically handed some money out. And I go into a gun store and a guy asked me, said, what type of gun are you looking for? I'm very specific. I said, I want to take a look at the 50 cal, the Desert Eagle. And the first thing he goes, boy, is your hand big enough? And I had to get used to that too, because I'm from Georgia. Dudes out here hollering, boy, that don't fly for me. Anyway, he goes, your hand's big enough, so I hold my hand up. He goes, you're damn right they are. So he puts it in my hand. He goes, let me ask you a question. Why do you want the 50? I told him, I said, that's easy. That's light work. I said, because I'm a whole punk. And the older dude, he looks at me, he said, I don't understand that. He said, you got to explain that to me. I said, no problem. I said, my baby hits me because I'm a heavy sleeper. Because I'm comfortable when I'm asleep. Hey, someone's in the house. I said, cool. I'm not going out my room to go see what it is. Where I hear it at, I'm shooting through the wall because I can redo sheetrock. They hear the thunder make a bark. They are going to understand the threat is gone. They're either going to be laying on my living room floor or they're going to leave because they don't want to deal with the cannon that's going through the wall. And he cracked up laughing. He goes, you do realize that's dangerous. I said, yes, breaking in my house is a dangerous thing. Because I'm not going to chase anybody. I'm too old for any of this other stuff. I am going to put 2 in your chest and I'm going back to sleep. That is the whole point. I just want you to understand that. But the whole thing was the right and the freedom. I'm going to defend my freedom because my security is going to be that 50 cal. Because giving up that right is also giving up your freedom. Now, the application is the adversarial system is the balancing act. And notice what I say, it's an adversarial system. The system itself is designed for combat. You have someone that is trying to stop you from doing something. You then go out and make sure you're able to do that thing that you're allowed to do. That is the adversarial portion of it. You are now in a fight. I even spoke about it as a fight contract. Take it as that. Go out there, throw the jabs, and then make adjustments during the fight. That is literally what happens. Round by round, you may have to do something different in the second round that you didn't do in the first round. It might go 5 rounds. You might have to do something different in round 5 that you didn't do in round 2. But you also have more openings now. So these are the things that I'm speaking about. This is an adversarial system. And in order for it to remain balanced, you must defend and you must protect. Defense and prosecution are sulfur and mercury, and the judge and jury as salt, bringing stabilization. Because again, the one thing that was the scariest thing for me was picking voir dire. Because off the bat, the prosecution used 6. I think we had 9 challenges. I think it was 9, but he used 6 challenges right off the bat, and that threw me off. So I then became nervous because one of the people that was there was one of the jurors I wanted to keep, but I ended up getting the main juror that I wanted, and we ended up having miraculously, other than we had 11 jurors that we wanted and one Italian lady. But it was funny because literally the jurors we wanted, they looked like me. And the juror that I actually, juror number 19, was the foreman. And it was because of, I'm not going to say it's because of the reasons, but I felt that human nature was going to actually take over and it was going to allow him to be what he was. But through that, we got a balancing act and we gambled on the 76% because of human nature. People don't want to convict people because, again, I didn't allow them to use the words defendant. They had to call me by my name. I gave them someone to hate. I didn't say the prosecution. I didn't say the state. I said every police officer's name. I said the prosecutor's name. Everybody that came up, I said their name because I assigned them the villain. I assigned me as human because that was the only way I was going to allow them to see me. But doing that, that was part of the balancing act. And that's how we brought stabilization to our perfect justice. Now, the philosopher's stone, again, what I just spoke about, is a mythical substance that could perfect all things, heal disease, extend life, and transmute metal. Now, heal disease, the disease is simply the charge. The extended life is generally how you're going to spend it. Are you going to be acquitted? Are you going to be on probation? Are you going to be paying money? Are you going to be in jail? And the transmuting of the metals would be what it is that you do after the fact. Now, the exclusive quest for a perfect justice goes with law evolves, presidents, amendments, and reforms to bring society closer to an idea of fairness and truth, though it may never be fully achieved. Why? Because being fair requires them to actually not do things that generate revenue versus actually bringing in criminals that are committing acts on purpose. That's not the system we have. We have a system that criminalizes life, and they criminalize bias. They criminalize, hell, breathing, walking, sitting in cars. These things, hell, being somewhere they don't think you should be. They criminalize everything that's around us, which in turn allows us to challenge everything they do and decide. And in going through that, civil rights amendments, Supreme Court cases, and international human rights laws are society's attempt to craft its philosopher's stone. And through application and challenging is our means or society's means of actually making sure it stays balanced. But when we're not fighting back, we are leaving the system imbalanced because we are not forcing them to be what they are supposed to be. Now, the Helmic seal, the Hermaic seal, containment for transformation. The alchemy of it. Experiments required sealed vessels to prevent escape of volatile energies. Now, legal procedure contains conflicts. Without rules of evidence, trial procedure, and constitutional limitation, disputes would explode into chaos. Courtrooms are sealed crucibles where volatile human passions are contained and refined into lawful resolutions. Mostly because we've actually watched the human passions leak out onto the streets and destroy blocks of cities. We've watched human passion leak out on the streets and become civil rights violations through water hoses. We watched these same acts be done by the blue flu in Atlanta. We watched these same acts in Buffalo when humans stepped over a 73-year-old man that they threw to the ground. And even in the context of going through this, it's understanding the ideals in which I'm trying to impart, because it's the whole idea of enforcement of what's yours. Because I often tell people, I'm not asking you to do anything you did not ask to do. Because when you go out and you say, I want this job has procedures. When you're choosing not to follow those procedures, why are you then upset with me? Because I'm asking you to follow procedures of your job. Because even I asked a young man the other day, I forgot what it was. He was like, well, why didn't he comply? And I said, it's amazing that we ask citizens to do a job that they're not required to do, but we never tell the police officer, why was he not professional? Why did he force him to do something he does not have to do? Why did that police officer believe he had a power he doesn't have without a crime? We never ask those questions because we make it okay for them to criminalize non-criminal activity. And yes, I pause for dramatic effect because I want you to think about that. Because alchemy in law is about seeing legal practice not just as a mechanical rule enforcement, but as a transformative art. The lawyer is the alchemist, the courtroom is the crucible, and justice is gold. Law takes human imperfections and through structure and process attempts to evaluate it into order, balance, and at its best, wisdom. That is one of the things that I am trying to embark on you. I want to make sure you have some form of going into the context of understanding protecting your personal liberty and that it's protected every day through lawful acts. And like the alchemist chart, the smallest part reflects the whole. Because again, the one then represents the 100. Coffee City. Because again, I always speak about this because it's important to challenge everything. Because if you allow one to get away with it, they then think it's okay for all to get away with it. And even in the purification aspects of it. Because when we're talking about hearsay exclusions and the coercion of confession, because we don't understand that the actual interrogation is designed to intimidate. And I want to do a video where I watched a young man, he was called in on a murder case. And he's being interrogated, and the cop goes, well, I just spoke to Johnny. You know Johnny? He goes, yes. He said, Johnny's your friend? He goes, no, we go to school together. But again, what he's doing is he's soliciting information from him to see if it's different from what Johnny gave. Now, if you know, like I know, most people are not going to give the same story. But then he goes in, well, yeah, I spoke to Johnny, and Johnny, he seemed to be truthful. I believe what Johnny said. And Johnny said this. Now, I want you to tell me your side since Johnny said this. And I cracked up laughing because I was like, he said nothing. Well, what did Johnny say? Because Johnny, I believe Johnny. Johnny is giving us some good information. Because Johnny's a good guy. Hold on, you just said Johnny was part of a crime. So how is his criminal activity good? So I'm missing that. And it goes back to whenever I actually went out and my brother-in-law at the time, my brother-in-law, he was a minor, and they called him in, and my grandmother was going to take him. Now, my grandmother's old school, so she definitely is like, oh, yes, sir. Yep, and whatever the police say, she's going to fuss a little bit, but she's going to let them do what they do. And she's going to be like, answer that question, because she doesn't know any better, because she doesn't know law, because she doesn't know what he has to answer and what he doesn't have to answer. Now, no knock on my grandmother, because when it came time to fight, grandma was fighting. And when it was time for her to listen to a baby, she listened. So, but going back, my brother-in-law, I said, Grandma, I'm going to take him up. So we go into the room, and he asked my nephew his name, my brother-in-law's name. And I said, next question, because it's implied, because he showed up. So now he asked the question. I said, next question. Well, where were you on such and such day? Next question. Well, why can't he answer any question? Because that's entirely too vague. That's entirely too vague. He's not going to answer a vague question and just do a fill in the blank. This ain't the first 48. Now, the crazy part was, had I not been there, he would have answered the question. Because, again, it seems innocuous. It seems unassuming. But they're not trained in law. And the people that they're dealing with aren't trained in law. So they don't know what they have to answer or what they don't have to answer. And again, that's the imbalance part of the system. The balancing was there was someone that knows law sitting there with him that forced them to enact law in a proper form. And in doing so, his perfect justice was he went home, didn't say a word, and they had nothing that they could do with him or against him without an unprecedented consequence. Because they understood that this wasn't just a person that was standing there that was going to listen to that BS and that didn't know better. And that's another one of the things that we talked about, because even whenever I was arrested for my RICO, they never got my fingerprints until the bail bondsman asked for it. He literally came up to my cell and asked me, hey, can I get your fingerprints? Absolutely, if I'll get to go home. He said, yeah, because grandma's already paid. He said, we just want it just in case. I was like, dude, I'm not running. But if that's what you need for me to go home, take me downstairs so we can go and do this. And they actually what was funny, the jailers were like, hold on, he's been here 72 days? And this is not our form. He's not even using our system. They're using ink, like an actual card. And it was all of them that were laughing whenever I came in. All of them now were perplexed. They were the same people that whenever I went to court, even the cops and the feds, they were sitting there like, hold on, I've never heard anybody speak to a judge in the way you did. And the judge was shook. And the whole context of it was I knew how to keep the system balanced. And I didn't allow for anything to not be challenged within that balance, because I understand the alchemy of law when I'm talking about these things. Now, without balance, law collapses into tyranny and chaos. And if you don't allow that chaos to be in you, there's not going to be chaos that comes out of you. Now, you can be in a bad situation. That does not mean you have to internalize that bad situation. Because one of the things I love to hear is people say, oh, God got me. And they believe that until God has to get them. Because I always say everybody's strong with no resistance. Everybody is strong until there's resistance. Because just to give you another example, when they had that issue in Minnesota, 2 million people, almost 2 million people were arrested. Less than 100,000 fought back. That means, 96, 97% of people did not fight back, but they were upset about the system. Just let that sink in. The majority of those people, it was a little more than 2.5% of the people that were arrested in Minnesota that was fighting back or that was getting arrested because of the issues that were happening in Minnesota at the time. And I actually showed you that 92 or 93% of all the police officers in Minnesota were bad cops. They actually did not fight back. When they were pressed, when they were actually in jail, when they were actually there to face the system, they chose not to do it. They made a conscious choice not to fight back. And then in the context of not fighting back, they just went about their day because there was now resistance. It was easy to go out there and holler and scream and jump around with a sign and throw bricks and set stuff on fire. It was hard when the people were standing in front of them and they actually had resistance. Because even whenever I was doing my little thing, right? Everybody, man, the feds kick open the door right now. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Get ready to go to trial. All of them are state's witnesses. They're witnesses for the prosecution. Everybody that was strong sitting on the other side looking at me. That's why I often tell people, because even the craziest part was when you have these issues, you know, I was about to get off track. I was about to go way off because that one pissed me off. Anyway, but because when we have a lot of these issues where they're not strong enough because they don't know themselves, and they're, I'm propped up. I'm gonna do this. I'm finna do the finna do's. When the door was actually kicked open, we found out that it was my brother's best friend that had initiated everything against us. It's always someone that's very close to you that's not as strong as you are that's putting you in mess because, again, your circle is out of balance because you're misjudging those that are around you. You're thinking they're stronger than they actually are. You're putting them in positions to which they are not capable of being at. And that's why when we're talking about balance, it is everything. Our circle was out of balance because we didn't have everybody that was standing on the same squares. Because two of my brothers, well, actually three of my brothers, one of them they actually dropped his charges literally before trial started. And it was me and two of my other brothers. That was it. Everybody else turned state. Everybody else was prosecution witnesses. They were material witnesses against us. And it was because our circle wasn't tight. Our systems were out of balance. And we allowed people around us that did not know themselves. And whenever you're doing that, these actions aren't those that are, even fighting back isn't for the faint of heart. This is not for weak people. And I say this oftentimes because I've actually had people contact me and I'll be like, yeah, you might as well just go ahead and pay the fine. Whatever the fine is, go and do it. If it's a little bit of jail time, go and do it because you're not ready for this. Because there's going to be pushback. They're going to say crazy stuff to you because, again, it's a psychological thing. This is psychological warfare. This isn't romper room. And if you're choosing to fight, you have to know what it is that you are capable or willing to do and accept. Now, the seal of law keeps society's chaos from overspilling. But the whole context of that is to make sure we are willing to fight back. Because justice is not mechanical. It's alchemic art. Lawyers, judges, and citizens all play a role in refining society. And that's done through our adversarial system. The system is designed for fighting. This is the Gladiator Academy. This is the gladiator stage. And this is not meant, everybody wasn't a gladiator. There were very few gladiators. You didn't have villages of gladiators. You had like 6 or 7. You have to make sure that you are prepared for this, because this isn't for the faint. This isn't for the weak. This isn't for those that just want to be doing something, because there is a challenge. There is a requirement. There is an ask, because a sacrifice must be made. Always understand that. And alchemy was never just about turning lead into gold. It was about transformation of matter, of spirit, and of society. And so in the law, every case is a crucible. Every ruling is transmutable. And in our endless pursuit for justice, maybe we are all alchemists. And remember, law is not just a tool. Knowledge is only potential power until it's applied. Now, I want to thank everybody for listening and paying attention. And if you like, let's make sure you keep the channel going. Let's keep the channel growing. As well as, if you are trying to have a consultation, here's my contact information. You can shoot the email, or you can actually set up a phone consultation with me directly down here under consultations at Calendarly, the GOCP, for 30 minutes. Donate, like I said, to keep us growing. Apple Pay, Cash App, and Zelle. So, I love you guys. Let's keep growing. Let's keep growing. And any comments you have, drop them in the comment section, and let's see if we can do something beautiful with it. Now,